Hello and good evening, my little Luxes. Welcome to another episode of Luxxxy Charms. I'm your host, cosplayer Charsie Lux, and it is another episode of Ghost Stories My Father Used to Tell Me. So come join me, come gather around the campfire with me, and for this Ghost Stories My Father Used to Tell Me, is a short story by me that is called The Doll. To begin this story, we must enter the life of a young girl, a young teenage girl by the name of Emily. She's only about 15 years old, and she's a very shy girl, very timid. She's like very introvert, but she still loves being able to hang out with her friends, the few people that she wants to be social with. It's not that she doesn't want to be social with people, she's just very awkward with being out there and being social. So for Emily, it was very difficult for her to find a job that she is comfortable with, because usually people want to, at the teenage point in time of their life, they want to get a job because they want to be able to afford to get a car, afford to get gas. Granted, usually most parents will help you get your first vehicle, but you still have the responsibility of paying for the gas, or if you want to go to the movies with your friends or anything like that. With her being around 15 years old, she wants to start collecting money and saving it away, especially trying to get prepared for college as well. But for her, it's not easy to try and find a job because she's socially awkward, and also generally most businesses and places you can't start working there until you're at least 16 years old. So what was the best job for her was to be doing babysitting, and usually she would babysit the neighbor kids next door. She was very close to them. She'd known them since they were little babies, and they were just cute little awkward kids just like she was. One was 6 by the name of Tammy, and then you had the other one who was the age of 8, and her name was Shannon. So you had Tammy and Shannon, who loved to always come over to Emily's house. So she would babysit them there because they felt that it was cool that they could hang out at a teenager's house. On one of the days that she was supposed to be babysitting Tammy and Shannon, she got a surprise from her mom first off. For that evening, Emily was going to be babysitting the 2 kids on her own because usually her mom worked nights, and with her mom being a single parent, she usually worked long late nights, and she also would have a second day job as well. But every once in a while, occasionally, she would work at the local grocery store for the night shifts. But she always trusted Emily. She was usually dependable and always at home. But she decided to have a small surprise for her daughter. Unbeknownst to her, her grandmother had decided that there was a bunch of heirlooms that she didn't want to hold on to anymore. So her mom came over with a old box of a bunch of stuff that the grandmother just decided she was ready to pass off and to give to her daughter and to give to her granddaughter. The surprise to Emily when her mother comes in with this big cardboard box lugging around some stuff, and Emily comes rushing over to help her mom and is inquiring what she has. So her mother tells her, well, your grandmother decided to downsize and decided she wanted to give us some stuff. And her mom seemed really excited because she's like, there's a certain item in here that I think you're going to be extremely excited about. So Emily's getting excited herself, thinking, okay, I really want to see what this item is that you want to show me. And her mom says, well, it's not necessarily something that you'll just get a kick out of it. She goes, it's not really something you're going to want. But she's like, I think that when Tammy and Shannon will come over to the house, that they would appreciate it. So then Emily's even more confused and thinking, okay, well, what is this? So her mom starts slowly going through the box and taking some items out, mostly just little knickknacks and things that Emily really could have cared less about, until she gets to a wooden box inside the cardboard box. And she pulls it out. It's a good size, and Emily is intrigued with what's inside this wooden box. So her mom places it on the dining room table and asks Emily to open the box. Emily slowly opens the box, and she is surprised to reveal that there is a porcelain doll inside of there. But she is completely taken aback by the fact that this is not a doll that she's ever seen before. Usually the dolls are pretty cutesy, and usually she thinks of the normal baby dolls that she sees in her life. But this one was a very vampiric looking doll. She noticed that it had a very gothic, dark tone to it. Now, any one of us that is a part of the horror genre would probably be extremely excited to see this doll, but for shy, awkward, timid little Emily, she was kind of scared of this doll. She had never seen anything like this before. So she looks at her mom and she's like, was this yours when you were younger? She goes, no. She goes, this was your passed down from generation to generation. She goes, this technically is your grandmother's doll, and it is even older than that. And she was explaining to Emily, she's like, this was such an old family heirloom that nobody was allowed to play with this doll. Which made Emily ask her mother the question of, well then, if nobody's been able to touch or to play with this doll for how many years, and it's a family heirloom, why would you think that I would want it, or to have Tammy or Shannon play with it when they come over when I babysit? And her mother said, because I feel like things should be used. She's like, yeah, this is something that's precious to the family and everything, but she goes, I feel like people should get enjoyment out of something. And she goes, I for years looked at this doll and wanted to play with it, but it would either sit on a shelf, basically it would be in a china hutch behind glass where nobody was allowed to touch it, and after the one night when her and her sister, so it would have been Emily's aunt with her mom, decided that they wanted to play with the doll, and the grandmother got very cross with them when she caught them playing with the doll. And the doll, ever since that day, was placed inside that wooden box and has not been out and seen the light of day since that day. Emily's mother is extremely excited to give Emily this doll, and she's just kind of taken aback, like, this thing kind of scares me. She's like, it's got long flowing black hair, and just, it's got blood red lips and pale white porcelain for its skin color and everything. And she's like, this is the most weird doll I've ever seen. She's like, okay mom, well, I guess I can let Tammy and Shannon play with it, but she's like, for now I'm just going to keep it in the box. So she closes the box back up and decides that she's just going to push it to the middle of the table, and she really has no interest being around this doll anymore because it creeps her out so much. Her mom just kind of continues going through the box of the rest of the stuff, taking stuff out, carefully putting it on the table, and then all of a sudden she realizes she's got to start getting ready for her shift down at the grocery store. Emily is in the middle of working on some homework when there is a knock at the front door, and she knows exactly who it is. She gets up, and it is the neighbors, and they are coming over to drop off their daughters, Tammy and Shannon, and they're going out for the evening and give their daughters a couple of hugs and kisses and thank Emily as always and head on their way. And so Emily takes the girls and they go into the living room, and she's just gonna have them play a few games. She gets the game Trouble out and sets it up for them, and she's gonna sit there and play the game with them. And she also lets them know, like, hey, why don't you guys go ahead and play the first game without me so I can sit here and finish up my math homework. Well, her mom comes down and of course tells the girls hello, and she goes to go to work, Well, she makes sure to look at Emily and say, hey, don't forget to show the girls the surprise. And of course, she's got that little smirk on her face and everything. And of course, Emily was thinking in her head, like, I wasn't even going to bring that doll up because I have no interest in touching that thing. But of course, because her mom brought it up, and smiles and wishes them goodbye and heads out for the night. And of course, for children and everything, Shannon and Tammy are totally infatuated with, what's the surprise? What is your mom talking about? Can we have the surprise? What's going on? What is it? So Emily eventually rolls her eyes and gives up, and she gets up and she has the girls follow her into the dining room area, and she takes the box and she moves it to the edge of the table, and she's like, go ahead and open it. And she's kind of interested to see what the girls' reaction is to the doll. And they open it, and they both had the exact same reaction like what Emily had. They were kind of taken aback, and they were kind of like, is this really a doll? Like, I've never seen one so scary looking before. And then the one giggles, the older one, Shannon, she's like, well, actually we have. And so the littlest one, Tammy's like, oh, come on, Chucky doesn't count. That Chucky's its own thing. And she's like, well, no, Chucky's girlfriend. So they're bringing up from The Bride of Chucky and referencing that this is kind of how that doll looked. And ever since they said that, then all of a sudden it just kind of smacked Emily in the face, and she was like, maybe that's why this thing is creeping me out, because it did vaguely look like the character who was the bride of Chucky. So she's thinking in her head, because she was scared of those movies, she's like, yeah, now I understand why I'm feeling the way that I am. And she just became even more paranoid. And so she explained to the girls what the doll was, that it was a family heirloom, and that her mom was hoping that the girls could enjoy it and if they wanted to play with it. Well, right away, Tammy and Shannon are like, oh, no, we want nothing to do with this thing. This thing is scary. And so they close the box and they kind of scoot it back to the middle of the table again, just like what Emily had done. And so she's like, okay, fine then, we can continue with what we were doing before. So the girls all go back to the living room, and the younger ones, of course, set up the game, and you have Emily who's finishing up her homework. So Emily finally finishes up her homework, and she goes to join the girls in their game. And they're in the middle of the second game when they start to realize that there is a strange noise coming from the dining room. So at first, they couldn't place it because Emily kind of brushed it off, but then she realized that Tammy and Shannon kept looking to the dining room. And they look at Emily and they're like, do you hear that? And Emily says, yeah, I hear that too. What do you think it is? And little Tammy's like, I don't know, but it sounds like something is trying to climb at something. She's like, it's like a faint kind of like digging sound, like a scratching sound. The little one saying that, it dawns on Emily, and she's like, what? You don't suppose that that's coming from on the dining room table, do you? So they all get up, they go and they peek into the dining room, and sure enough, they can just kind of hear this tiny little, like little scritching sound, like just a little tiny. So then they're like, okay, where is that coming from in the dining room? Well, they slowly, very, very slowly, and of course you have Emily in the lead, and she's got the two little girls right behind her, side by side. They're both kind of holding on to Emily's shirt and pulling down on it because they're a little scared. But it's just this tiny little noise. And finally, Emily realizes that it's coming from the box that the doll is sitting in. And when it dawns on her, she just goes to turn and get the girls, and with her quick movements and everything, she ends up scaring the poor girls because she just is quick to turn and try and grab them and steer them to the living room. And of course, with a little 6 and 8-year-old, she manages to make them holler out because they were freaked out and they were scared. So they get to the living room and they decide that they're going to peek from the doorway into the dining room, and they're just slowly peeking their heads out. And it's just kind of a funny scenario where you have Emily on the top and Shannon towards the middle, and then you got little tiny Tammy, she's peeking out as well, and they're just listening to that scratching sound that is going on inside the box where the doll's at. And little tiny Tammy is like, you don't suppose that that's the doll, do you? And Shannon's like, well, what else could be making that noise? What else could be in that box? It's gotta be that doll. Something is wrong with that doll. And finally, Emily, just realizing that these two girls are just petrified, she's like, okay, there's gotta be some kind of a explanation for this. Like, dolls don't come to life. Chucky's just a movie. There's no way that this is a living doll. And she's like, this has been a family heirloom for years and everything. So Emily's like, okay, you two stay here. I'm gonna go and investigate. And of course, as soon as Emily tries to go out into the dining room area, the two girls start hollering out and they're like, no, don't go. If you go, that doll is going to get you. And she's like, no, there's no way that this doll is alive. She's like, let me go investigate. Let me see if there's like a bug or something in there. And Shannon's like, no bug can make that kind of sound. There is no way that there's a bug that can do that. So Emily keeps trying to calm him down. Well, of course, because of the uproar and with the loud voices coming, they realize that this little scratching noise has stopped and that it is completely dead silent on that table inside that box now. So Emily, very carefully, she just continues and she goes to go to the table. And she slowly goes and she gets the box and she moves it towards her. And of course you just can hear Shannon and Tammy kind of quivering and a little bit of whimpering in the background because they're totally petrified. And Tammy decides to go, are you sure you want to open that box just in case? If it is something wrong with it, maybe we should just tie the box up and wait until your mom comes home and she can take a look in it. And Emily finally decides, because she's kind of mad at that comment, because she's like, I can do anything that my mom can do too. And she's like, I can take care of this situation and I can protect you girls. And she goes, this doll is not real. And she opens the box and she looks in, and of course it's just the doll sitting there. It's not moving, it's just a plain doll. So Emily turns to the girls and she goes, there, come see for yourself. It's not alive, it's not moving, it's not gonna hurt you or anything. She's like, come take a look at it. Of course, the girls are scared and freaked out. And they don't want to come anywhere near it. And Emily's like, come here, come take a look at this thing. There is nothing scary about this doll. And of course, you get little Tammy. She goes, what are you talking about? That is the scariest doll I've ever seen. And Emily's like, okay, I can agree with you on that, but she's like, it's not gonna hurt you. It is an inanimate object. It is not real. It cannot harm you in any way or form. Finally, she's able to talk the girls into coming on over. Shannon a little bit more than little Tammy, but she comes up behind her sister and they slowly peer into the box on top of the table and just kind of looking at the doll, and they're like, okay, it's not moving, it's just a doll. And Emily's like, that's exactly what I was telling you. It's just a stupid doll. It might be scary looking, but it's not gonna do anything. It can't come to life. It's not real. Shannon and Tammy just start giggling and thinking like, oh wow, and just in their happiness thinking like, yeah, that's just silly, monsters aren't real and this and that, and they're kind of excited and giggly and holding on to the box. Emily's just kind of like showing it to them. Well, then all of a sudden, as they're all looking at the doll, they realize that the doll starts to move, and the girls just freeze as they're staring at this doll and thinking, no, there's no way. But as it dawns on them and they're just staring at this doll and realizing that it is indeed moving, the head just starts to kind of do this little head tilt, and little Tammy just lets out this blood-curdling little scream, and of course while she's screaming she just raises her hands as she knocks the box out of Emily's hands, and the box goes flying and the doll goes flying, and of course all the girls just scatter. You have Shannon and Tammy and Emily just kind of running away, and they hear the box hit the ground and the doll hit the ground, and you could just hear it with this shattering noise because it's a porcelain doll. And Emily then kind of cringes because she realizes that the face of this doll has just broken. And so the girls were hiding in the living room again, and they're just waiting, and they're like, do you hear anything? Did it get up? Did it move? And of course Emily, trying to be brave for the girls, decides to go and peek through the doorway. And of course you have Shannon and Tammy pulling out her shirt again, like, don't go out there, don't go out there. And she's like, I need to see what's going on. And she notices that the box and the doll are just on the floor, and they're not moving or anything. So she's like, okay, I need to investigate this. I need to figure out what was going on with that. And of course, Tammy is just crying. She's sobbing. She's so scared. She's like, the doll moved. You can't go towards it. And Emily's like, I don't understand what was going on with that, but she's like, dolls aren't real. They can't come to life. They can't hurt you. And she goes, I'm going to prove it to you. And she goes out again, and she goes and she grabs onto the doll. She picks it up, and of course this poor doll is cracked in the face, and poor Emily is just kind of sadly looking at this broken doll because it had been a family heirloom for how many years. And while she's holding on to the doll, and the doll starts to move again as she goes to break out and drop it, but then she realizes that it's a squeaking noise, and she sees that there is a mouse in the hair of this doll. And Emily lets out a little squeak herself as she drops the doll again because of the mouse being there, and she's freaking out. And finally she takes one of the smaller boxes from one of the other knickknacks that had come from her grandmother, and she had trapped the mouse in there and had gathered it up and had quickly went and she had taken this poor mouse outside because she didn't want to harm it in any way, but she wanted to release it outside. She knew she didn't want it in the house anywhere. Well, she came in, and poor Tammy and Shannon were nowhere to be found. And Emily imagined that when she had dropped the doll and had made that little screaming squeak sound of her own, she probably scared the poor girls. So she goes into the living room. She's like, where are you two at? And they were hiding behind the couch. So they came out because Emily was asking for them, and she explains to him, she goes, the doll wasn't real. She goes, there was a mouse that was in the doll, and that's why it was moving. And Shannon and Tammy, through their little cries and whimpers, were kind of like, so the doll wasn't moving? And Emily's like, no, there was just a mouse that was on the doll. That's all there is to it. She's like, I'm sorry that I scared you, but she goes, the mouse ended up scaring me. She goes, I caught it and I got it outside. So she's like, go ahead and come out and we'll take a look at this doll and assess any damage, because Emily knew that there was damage, and since she had dropped this poor porcelain doll again, came out, and so she knew that this poor doll was not repairable. It was half the face was completely smashed in and completely gone, little pieces here and there. So her and the girls got a broom and a dustpan and gathered up all the little pieces they could, and they gathered it and put it into the box. And Emily's like, well, not much that we can do about it, so I'm just gonna take it and put it outside for now, and if my mom decides she wants to keep it, she can keep it, but she goes, for now, I'm just gonna go put it in the garbage. And she's thinking in her head, she goes, this doll was creepy anyways. She goes, I don't really want it in the house. The girls had no interest with it. And she goes, we were freaked out by this thing anyway. So her and the girls go and they take it and they put it on top of the trash bin and go back into the house and continue on with their games. Of course, they were still a little kind of in an off mood from the whole night and everything being scary, but Emily gets them calmed down and they enjoy the rest of the evening. So finally, she gets the girls to fall asleep on the couch, but she knew that their parents would be picking them up soon. Sure enough, within half an hour or so after that point in time, the parents come and pick up their daughters, and since they're asleep, they both just kind of bundle them up in their arms and carry them on back home. Emily had decided that she was tired and wanted to go to bed for that night. She went up to her own bedroom and got completely ready for bed and went to sleep for the night. Well, the following morning when she got up, she went downstairs to have breakfast, and her mom was there already drinking a coffee herself and had breakfast ready to go. And so her mom had fixed a plate of pancakes for her and put it in front of Emily. And her mom's like, hey, you and the girls must have played with the doll? And Emily kind of stopped and looked at her mom and, what do you mean? She goes, well, the box wasn't on the table anymore. So she's like, I just assumed that the girls had played with the doll. She's like, where did you end up putting it once they were done playing with it? And then her mom stopped. She goes, oh no, you didn't let them take it home with them, did you? She goes, that needs to stay here. And Emily just kind of groans, and her mom's like, what? So Emily had to explain the story to her mom, let her know exactly what had happened, that they had gotten the doll, had taken a look at it and that the doll had moved mysteriously and had scared them all to death, but ended up being that it was this mouse. But her explaining the story to her mom, she's like, there was an accident. And the mom's like, well, what do you mean there was an accident? So Emily's like, well, we may have dropped the doll. And of course her mom's like, what do you mean may? And of course, so coaxing it out of her daughter, she finally admits to the fact that they had dropped it and had broke the doll. And so the mom, of course, completely upset about it. She goes, well, where'd you put it? And Emily's like, well, it wasn't salvageable, so we put it in the box and we put it in the trash. And her mom is just like, why would you just throw it away? And Emily's like, well, it was broken. And her mom's like, well, maybe we'd get it repaired. And Emily's like, half of its face was gone. And her mom's like, I don't care. It's been in the family for how many years? You don't just get to decide you're throwing it away. So her mom gets up and she goes out and she's gonna go get it from the trash. Well, she comes in and she has the box and everything, and she goes to open it so that she can assess the damage of this doll, and she looks at Emily and she goes, is this some kind of a joke? And Emily's like, well, what are you talking about? And her mom's like, there's nothing wrong with this doll. Why did you throw it away? And Emily's like, what are you talking about? She's like, half of its face was broken. It got dropped twice, and she goes, it was broken. I saw it with my own eyes. So she gets up to look at her mom, and she's wondering if her mom is toying with her, and she just stops dead in her tracks when she looks at this doll, and the doll had no damage whatsoever, no cracks. The face was completely perfect all over again. So, my little Luxes, I hope you enjoyed my short story from high school that was called The Doll. And obviously, poor little Emily didn't quite get the family heirloom that she had always wanted, but I think she's going to be stuck with this doll for quite some time. Thank you once again for joining me on another Luxxxy Charms of ghost stories my father used to tell me, and I hope you enjoyed my ambience of the campfire, and I will come share your stories and your loves with me, any short stories, and we love telling stories around the campfire. That's that's just kind of the way we are when it comes to the horror genre and wanting to be scared. And you can find me, Charsie Lux, on my Twitter for Charsie Lux for 3X's, which is LUXXX, or on my Instagram for Charsie87. I have another YouTube channel that I do with my friend DC called Little Channel of Horrors. And thank you for always coming back and joining me. And I know a lot of people like to enjoy these ghost stories with me. I want to keep involving all of you with it, and I want to evolve my channel as much as possible. But yeah, thank you once again for joining me, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.